Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Hisham. I'm from Ibera Consulting. I'm a principal at Ibera Consulting. And today I have the honor of being joined by Alejandro Ortiz, Alejandro Ortiz Consulting.
Thank you very much, Hisham, for the invitation to collaborate in this webinar together. I'm Alejandro Ortiz, the founder and CEO of Alejandro Ortiz Consulting and in Australia. So I'm very happy to be here with you, Hisham, to deliver this very interesting session for all the audience who is with us today.
The pleasure is mine as well, my friend. Really happy to do this today with you. And today for our audience, we're going to be discussing the preparing your firm's future leaders. We've actually worked on this very hard, so hopefully you'll enjoy it. Just to make sure I've got a technology check, can you see the slides there, Alejandro? Excellent. All right, so today's LinkedIn live webinar is about preparing your firm's future leaders. So as all of us work in teams and property and companies, we always think about the eye for the future. And from an executive leadership standpoint, what does that mean and entail for our organizations? Without further ado, this is our nice small thumbnails for myself and Alejandro, and this is our companies, Ibera Consulting and Alejandro is Consulting. So we'll start off before anything on acknowledgement of the country that we currently live in. Australia is a country we live and love to live in. We also acknowledge that there are traditional owners that have predated the current state of Australia for tens of thousands of years. Our estimates go as far as 65,000 of continual development, continual stories. And those owners of the land that we stand on today, we acknowledge and pay respect and tribute to their elders, past, present, and emerging. We further affirm that connection to the land has not been lost, and they continue to survive and thrive, and we are immensely grateful for sharing this land with them. Next, we would like to go about a small, brief introduction about us before we go into our topic today. So I'll start with myself since I'm speaking. My name is Hisham Ibrahim. I started my professional life as an electrical design engineer back in New Zealand in 2007 in building services. And from there on, I took roles pretty much internationally within Australia and overseas, following to project management from electrical. And then finally, as I was doing my MBA in Macquarie, where I met Alejandro, I took on more business development and management consulting roles. So today nowadays I advise on assets management, strategy, change management, digital transformation within the corporate environment. Moving over to Alejandro. Alejandro, please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Hisham, once again. So yes, Alejandro Ortiz, the founder and CEO of Alejandro Ortiz Consulting. Before looking up my company in Australia back in 2020, I was working in leadership roles back in Colombia, that is my hometown, and other places. And I decided to set up my company when I really wanted, when I thought was the right opportunity to do it. And after finishing my MBA at university, where I met you, Hisham, I was able to think clearly about my idea of being an entrepreneur and decided to launch my consulting practice. I do provide career and professional services to professionals and entrepreneurs who want to find direction in their lives. And I do it by implementing conscious mindset programs that are based on the foundations of neuro-linguistic programming. And that's why I wanted to do it when I thought was the right moment. And it's good because in the end, we're going to be discussing about leadership today. And sometimes we need a time to be ready to be appointed as a leader in the company. So thank you once again, Hisham, for this invitation to join this webinar. And I really look forward to delivering a very nice session with you and to make a positive impact on the people who are with us today.
Pleasure is both for me and you to actually be hosting this presentation together, Alejandro. All right, without further ado, we'll start delving to the topic. Increasingly, and we see it a lot from people's common trend, is that they see that majority of the organizations out there, whether they're technical, whether they're in marketing or in any field, they tend to, when they grow in size, to hire their executive management. And we're specifically scoping this presentation for the executive leadership of an organization. They tend to hire those from external, from outside the company. Obviously, there are pros and cons in both, whether you're hiring or promoting from within. So we're going through them just for the sake of fairness. So when firms actually hire leaders externally, they are doing that for certain benefits that will bring over to the organization. Namely, the person might be actually opening market contacts and new markets with an experience that the organization would not have, or may actually open up blind spots that the organization currently doesn't have within its talent pool and be able to benchmark it against the organizations from which they emerged from. Also, in doing so, those senior management positions, when they actually come and hire from overseas, from outside, they actually come with new connections in the market, new ways of doing things, and evidently, it actually brings up a benefit to the company by being able to open up new opportunities with their market connections. And thirdly, probably when a company needs to look at enhancing their culture or changing their culture from a norm or a status quo that would like to influence from outside, it's probably easier to get a leader from outside to challenge that status quo and be able to provide examples that are evidently in other organizations without obviously breaching confidentiality. On the flip side of the coin, though, we do see that in doing so, leaders tend to actually, when get hired from outside, tend to alienate some of the staff that have been very proactive in trying to show initiative. And those staff would be feeling overlooked and powerless to make an effect in the organizations that they invested time and energy in. So that's some of the negative sides of actually hiring leaders from outside. The second thing is obviously the adage that, or the folk tale that says that people are appreciated when they leave a company and jump ship, and they're appreciated in terms of remuneration and in terms of roles and responsibilities. That tends to ring true in some of those situations. And unfortunately, though that may be, that investment in the company doesn't seem to be that the loyalty is responded or paid back as it should be. Thirdly, obviously, there's a potential culture clash. Obviously, when you're bringing a new thinker into the team, where there's a certain hierarchy, a certain way of doing things, and that culture clash may not be obvious or evident and may take some time to manifest itself. So these are the pros and cons in a nutshell when you hire an executive leader externally into this company. On the flip side, I'll now manage over to Alejandro for the hiring from within.
Well, thank you, Hisham. And yes, in fact, it's a very interesting introduction when it comes to understanding pros and cons of bringing people from outside the company or promoting leadership from within the company. And I will be talking about cultivating leadership from within. And this is, of course, one side of the coin. And being able to understand this side is actually important for many companies and for the people who are joining us today. So the importance behind cultivating leadership from within starts, becoming important because there's always advantages of fostering leadership in our current employees. When we do that, people feel more engaged with the company, as Hisham mentioned, but at the same time, we do, promote loyalty and morale to the company, which is also good. Current employees already know many things about the company. They do know the processes, the procedures. They have been working the company for quite a long time. So for them to be able to understand the culture, it's something that external leaders will face as a challenge, right? So we need to take into account that having that advantage of current employees is actually very good when we want to promote leadership from within. However, it's important to understand here, Hisham, that even though everyone has the potential to be a leader, not everyone is ready to be a leader. Well, because in the end, we do need certain skill set to be able to be appointed as a leader. For example, being a leader doesn't necessarily mean to be a manager. We do need to have certain skills that a leader will be able to implement and to lead a company for growth and success. So, for example, the capacity to influence others, the capacity to convince and persuade others, the ability to be an example for others to follow that leader. At the same time, the confidence in doing what they do and the level of knowledge or expertise in certain fields. When it comes to assessing those features, it's very important to understand who has that potential, who has that skill set. And when companies understand this, they can select carefully those potential employees who have the potential to have that leadership pathway with the company. So that's why, even though we have the chance to be cultivating leadership from within, it's actually very important to look within the people first so that they do have that skill set within already. So in order to understand this even more, I would like to move to the following slide to have a discussion with you and with the audience who is with us today. And there's a quote here that is actually very interesting that was written by Andre Gide that says, "Be faithful to what would exist within yourself." And I wanted to bring this quote because in the end, we need to be true to the genuine intentions to be a next leader. Sometimes we just want to have a promotion. Sometimes we do want to have an opportunity in a different department in the company, and that's fair, and that's true, and that's great. But now think about what is within you in order to understand the genuine purpose behind that. In my case, for example, I do remember when I wanted to be a leader in the company, sometimes even though I wanted to be a leader, I wasn't ready. So I needed to develop and to upskill myself first before having the intention to jump into that next position. So it's important to be true to yourself first. And I would like to ask you, Hisham, what do you think about this quote?
I believe with it, actually, very firmly and strongly believe in it. The genuine and authenticity of presenting yourself, the way things you're actually excited about in your work, the way you actually go and take the initiative, that flow of work, it has a magnetizing effect on the work culture you lead. So if you lead by example and you understand that you have challenges to rise up to and be able to be faithful to yourself, you don't actually change them and mold yourself. Unfortunately, a lot of the situations that we currently present ourselves in the corporate cultures is that there's a culture speak. The culture speaks that you have to present and show yourself in a familiar way. And I do support that for many reasons. However, you should also be refreshingly authentic. And that refreshing authenticity brings out not just the words, the action that you bring and the value that you bring to the work that you deliver. So being that person that provides that sort of positive flow and authenticity to whatever you do will bring people on board with the way you think and also presents opportunities over the long run to contribute ideas that people will then tag on and present their own spoken voice within the organization. So in the end of the role, at the end of the day, we're all there with voices, opinions, and ideas to share, as well as work to do. And the way we can go about it, doing it smoothly while fostering those ideas and be able to present those opportunities to the benefit of ourselves and the company will manifest itself in bigger opportunities and greater satisfaction for all the teams that we work in as individuals and as groups. What do you think?
I do agree with that, Hisham, actually. And by saying this and giving the chance to the audience to participate, I would like to give the chance to the audience to share their questions over the chat box. As you know, we do have here the chat box tool here on Zoom, so please feel free to do it. And I do have here a question that was raised, and I would like to ask this question out loud. The question is, what challenges do you foresee in identifying and nurturing our future leaders, and how can we overcome them? So what would you say in regards of this question, Hisham?
The challenges that the actual current leadership sees in identifying future leaders. So if I get it correct, that's the way that's been angled or designed. Now, as a person that's in executive leadership, there's always that competition versus collaboration and obviously learning. So as an executive leader, you're trying to foster initiative taking, role taking, stretching of your current roles and responsibilities so that you are very proactive but not competitive. A certain level of competition is healthy among organizations. We all know that because it helps foster that best behavior, best practice, being very nice and lean and competitive, but only to a certain benchmark limit. After that, it becomes toxic and self-defeating. So the balance, getting the balance right of fostering innovation, initiative taking, decisions amongst team, so that you're showing the leadership in taking action, is very encouraged, but not at the expense of destroying the team dynamics and communication share, because that is very important and essential for every team to succeed. That's my 2 cents worth of it. What do you think, Alejandro?
I do agree with that. And adding to your explanation, which is, by the way, actually very interesting, is that besides of fostering a culture of collaboration, it's also very important to understand another challenge in the companies when it comes to fostering that culture of leadership. And the challenge is that, we are human beings, and sometimes understanding or identifying what we want out of that promotion, out of that leadership role, we have no idea what to expect because we are not even clear about what we want. So nowadays, especially with my clients, I do understand or assess people based on the genuine intentions behind getting that promotion. And sometimes they don't even have the answer to that. So the challenge here, I would say, Hisham, is helping people or those potential leaders to really understand what is the genuine intention behind accepting or wanting that leadership role. Is because they want to be able to change the culture of the organization? Is because they want to be motivating other people so that they can perform even better? Is because they have something particular, the thing the company needs, so that when they are in that position, they will be able to implement that. So there should be a why behind the intention of having that leadership role, so that when they make the decision, they are true to themselves. So I would say that the challenge here is actually being able to understand the why behind the change. And in order to overcome this, my recommendation is always to implement programs of self-awareness, self-development in the company, so that the company is able to help individuals, especially those ones with high potential, understand the why behind the genuine intentions of that leadership position.
Good.
So by saying this, Hisham, I think we have covered this question. We can continue with the next slide.
Yeah, go ahead. So we're pretty much moving on to leadership succession. So leadership succession, in the definition of organizations putting development programs for their future upcoming leaders, there tends to be a motto of leadership succession being a seasonal effect that pretty much depends on how many leadership positions are made available, or if there's someone willing to retire in the next year or two. So therefore, we're bringing out a leadership development for the next generation of leaders to come through. I try and employ organizations to think about it as more business as usual, rather than a seasonal occasion. The reason being is that leadership can take multi-dimensional, multiple forms. And it's not just all executive. Obviously, there is technical leadership, there's communication leadership with organizations and outside clients, there's technology leadership, and there's culture leadership as well. I tend to say that's the magnetizing effect, that if you actually have people working together and they're working to provide fresh ideas, that influences other people to bring their ideas of how to do things. And therefore, the magnetism, the magnetizing effect of being able to share that culture will influence a better working modus or modus operandi, MO, for the whole company as a large. So in saying that, leadership succession will bring the benefits from within, from hiring within, because as we said, the intricate knowledge of systems, people, and culture means that people have already invested their time in reading the landscape around them and understanding how can they best leverage it for a strategy that's coming up, for a challenge that's coming up, what are resources that are needed, and be able to rely on those resources and their connections to help them map out a better delivery platform, a better challenge, rising up to the challenge. And obviously that proactive cadre will then be contributing and in turn rewarded by their level of initiative and stretching their abilities to rise up to the challenge. So it's not investing in the current staff in times of need, it's investing throughout the year, throughout the lifetime of the business. But identifying the efforts and the initiatives as they rise and present themselves to people to rise up to become leaders. And by rising up to become leaders, they're actually prioritizing the business incentives and the business priorities over their own. So you identify those efforts and diverse talents and how they present themselves to the company's a better goal. You develop the depth and the diversity and the continuity of learning for those individuals, but not just them, it's the team effort. Because obviously you don't want to alienate others by showing pretty much your goal, like the hero champions, and alienating the others to kind of feel disenfranchised within the company. And it's also in deployment and testing across the board, your actual individuals to see whether they can rise up to the challenge. And if they rise up to the challenge, can they maintain that broader depth, broader thinking, broader considerations, given the fact the new skills they've taken on board. We'll move on to nurturing leadership potential through mindset shifts. I'll give it over to you, Alejandro.
Yes, Hisham, and complementing on what you said about the succession plan, it's a next stage, which is also very important, is nurturing leadership potential through mindset. And here, the important component is that this is the second stage or the second step in the chain of cultivating or promoting leadership from within the company. And once we have selected those potential leaders, it's actually very important to nurture those employees with, content, courses, training, development. And in particular, it's important to help them change or to switch that mindset that some of them might have when it comes to facing barriers, when it comes to facing obstacles, right? Because in the end, if we want to promote a culture of growth and change and new discoveries, and we are just on the status quo or doing the same thing, we won't be able to change. So shifting that mindset is actually very important to incorporate in the development and training programs fostered by the company inside. At the same time, it's important to understand those limiting beliefs that some people have when it comes to embracing change. And I would say to do that, sometimes it's actually very important to take into account the expertise or the advice of maybe external consultants so that the companies can actually implement those shifts in mindset through important or proper training programs. And the final thing is emphasizing the importance of environment that encourages risk taking. And the reason for this, Hisham, is because if the company really wants to change and wants to foster growth that is sustainable, we all need to take risks, right? And even though there's an analysis behind taking risks, it's actually very important that the employees who are selected as potential leaders have that mindset. So I'm going to be taking this risk. It's going to be good for the company. It's going to be good for the employees. And after proper assessment, we are confident to do that. So in summary, it's basically providing trainings within the company that incorporate that mindset shift, which is changing that fear of failure or imposter syndrome. Secondly, trying to help them understand those limiting beliefs so that they can switch to another more positive mindset. And finally, encouraging people to be more risk takers. And by saying this, I think we are nurturing a culture of leadership when it comes to empowering or encouraging people from within the company to be those future leaders.
I agree. And pretty much this is what's leading off to now the research part of this webinar, where we were discussing first the quotes that we got through doing our research for this. So just driving the point home is that there's management, which is the day-to-day activities, making sure you maintain a competitive market position, and there's systems which are pretty much in there to either facilitate the work, but also to make sure that you are continually acknowledging the people and development and training and rising up to the rank is not sequential and seasonal. It's rather a parallel activity that's running in the background, presenting itself in opportunities as people take that initiative on. The second point to there is that most companies will still consider talent development as a project or a program. And unfortunately, that comes to the detriment of employees being valued and feeling that they're an integral part of that development, rising up the ranks to assume the future leadership roles within their companies that they're invested in. So without further ado, I'm actually going through an executive bench research program that was held in 2010. So it's a bit dated. However, it's actually spanning over 7 or 8 years of asking Fortune 500 companies and their future leaders or their current leaders how they come about in identifying leaderships within their company and within their ranks. So the first thing we'd like to go through is this survey was pretty much answered by 115 leaders in Fortune 500 companies in the US and Europe. And the question was posed as, what roles do you and the senior team within the company to play in identifying and developing your company's future leaders? So out of the 115, the trend came up overwhelmingly in support of identifying the individuals that have high potential. That high potential will delve in a second exhibit, but let's take that for a while, that they see themselves as future leaders and actually identifying the traits that will qualify people to become high individuals, potential candidates for a future leadership position. And in the next four are pretty much about how do they define leadership abilities based on the strategy that the company has already set, and how do they fit within that strategy. The one-on-one coaching and mentoring for the people who have already raised their initiative, raised their skill, and obviously allocated resource for leadership development. So you can read through those. All of them are important, but specifically we're talking about people who are making a strategic shift to align with the company, but also in understanding that potential has already been identified by the higher leadership team, which we'll come across in the next slide. And just to actually put on this as well, that most companies currently actually report that they're not very confident in meeting their abilities, meeting future growth needs. And so they do need help from their current working staff in identifying those opportunities. And the best way of opening opportunities is by such. So what companies look for in their future leaders, and this is again answered by 111 companies in the Fortune 500 group, was the ability to build strong relationships both internally within the company and externally. So that is a key role, followed closely by the openness to change and growth. As managers and executive leaders of a company, they manage uncertainty and growth and targets all the time. So being able to adapt and being agile to the needs of the organization are a key attribute of a leader. So if you show yourself as willing to take on those adaptability, agility, and be able to foster open connections rather than silos within the company and within your client to feel that they're comfortable working and interacting with you, that is a key indicator of you being a potential future leader for the business that you're operating in. And that's where we're coming back to the flow. So if you actually enhance the flow of your work and the voice, your inner voice being able to be in alignment with the way you're working, with ethics, with intention, with challenges that you're rising up to, that will show up and magnetize the team around you to support you in that role without creating antagonisms and friction within the culture that you're currently operating in. All of these are important, but also noteworthy to see that people who think that the smartest can actually win the game of leadership, unfortunately, as much as I hate to say, it's a team game. And all of the ones above actually point to that you actually have to be able to motivate and inspire others. You have to have confidence to make the right decisions or even make a decision, be decisive about a path you need to take in order to achieve in your role. The personal desire to succeed, the commitment to business success, even above when making personal sacrifice. So you're actually prioritizing the business objectives sometimes above your own. Not saying that you're going to be sacrificing all the time, but you're showing that initiative to be able to prioritize the business objectives is a key point in the leadership role, because as leaders, we're actually prioritizing the team's success above our own. But yeah, with senior intellectual abilities coming ranking at 45% when everything else is ranking the majority, that's a telltale sign of how leadership views the attributes within their rising rank of staff as to where to actually go and select their leaders. I'll also jump to other exhibits that I haven't actually tabulated in a format. And in the same study, we've actually looked at people who have already been rising up ranks of future leaders within their cadre. And they pretty much asked about the measure of the impact and value they provided, the perceived effectiveness of development and experiences. And they have rated pretty much their former the former leaders that they've actually coached and been mentored by, one being ineffective to five being extremely effective. And coming in at roughly around 4 or 3.9 is they have been given all the time developmental stretch assignments within the company. So these are assignments that are pretty much outside the roles and responsibilities that have been naturally assigned to them. And they've been given that stretch in order to push themselves and pressure themselves to deliver in a whole new environment. That if they can actually be able to succeed, that is a telltale sign of you being able to rise above the ranks and be able to cope with the challenges under pressure. In second place, it's pretty much when your boss is involved and being able that you have that communication between you and the boss and the team, be able to inspire others and be able to actually lead with in-house training and executive education programs, understanding the relationship and the mentoring relationship you have with your peers so that it's not a competition game, rather it's a group support and a team building game. And then pretty much you have to exercise your decisiveness, peer contact, and making sure that you get feedback, both positive and negative, and be able to grow from it. From there, I actually then move on to our next slide, which is nurturing talent for long-term success. I'll move it over to our colleague, Alejandro.
Well, thank you, Hisham, for this. Was paying attention to the stats, which are really interesting, and I'm sure that the audience it's benefiting from looking at those stats, because it's all about understanding what we need as leaders, or if we are senior leaders, what we need to be looking at when it comes to finding those potential future leaders for the organization. And here, complementing that research, Hisham, my last slide is basically thinking about the long-term success. So once we have identified the potential leaders in the company, and based on the attributes that you just mentioned are actually very important among those 111 companies, once we have identified those potential leaders, then we offer continuous learning and skill development so that they have the capability of embracing those learnings and trainings and being able to implement them into the processes, the culture, and being able to share that with the employees they are going to be leading in the future. And finally, it's important to understand the crucial role of feedback and reflection. Why? Because in the end, when we are open to change, when we are open to self-reflect, we can always improve and enhance our capabilities. So embracing this culture of long-term success is actually important, because every company wants to grow in the future with a sustainable growth. And every company wants to make decisions based on something that is going to be for the present and for the future. So when the leader has that culture embedded in their minds, that is all about the long-term success, is actually very important to sustain growth in the company. So by summary, I would like to say that, first of all, we do need to identify those potential leaders from identifying what they have within in terms of that skill set. Secondly, we need to promote or to implement, I would say, those training programs to close the gaps in terms of leadership. And finally, paving that path for long-term success so that the company can have sustainable growth in the future. So by saying this, Hisham, I would like to move on to the next slide when we have a final quote. So I would like to ask or to assess this quote with you, Hisham, and also with the audience that is actually with us today. And I'm very happy to be having people joining us today because this was developed with Hisham and I for you. So the quote is, leadership is not about being in charge, it's about taking care of those in your charge. The way I do see this, Hisham, and the audience, is that once we are appointed as those, or that leader within the company, we need to make sure that people are going to be able to follow us. People are going to be perceived that the leader is actually there to support and motivate us. Because if we don't have the people around us, it will be very hard to actually implement changes within the companies or to work on that sustainable growth. And that's why we mentioned at the beginning that the ability to influence others, the ability to convince and persuade others, and to have that genuine confidence within us to be able to take that risk, it's actually very important in leadership. So it's not about being appointed as a leader by itself. It's about being able to convince others to follow us. So what would you like to share with us, Hisham, in terms of this quote?
I absolutely agree, and I respect deeply Simon Sinek. He's a leading authority in marketing and also about business culture. So, in the way that he's saying it, it's pretty much it's not doesn't matter if you're the loudest person in the room as a leader. It's your ability to be able to foster the people to have their own voices to share and be able to act on those voices. So therefore empowering them to have a share in what they say or do in contributing to the why of the business. So I absolutely agree with the quote in saying that leadership is actually fostering and preparing those people that are within your scope as an organization to make sure find their own authenticity, their charge, their uniqueness, and how pretty much be able to foster and harness that to then propel not just the organization, but each and every one of them to find their comfortable flow within the organization. So that is a very good resonating quote. And I also believe that in doing so, when you find your authenticity, it gives you that sort of giving back effect, the magnetizing effect that people feel the vibe, you feel the value that you're presenting to the organization. And they will also present their value. And together, when you actually build that through a team, that will show in the firm's culture. You'll be a culture that you guys will be happy to belong to rather than a culture that is antagonizing or sometimes polarizing certain people or making sure that you only work to a role. So show your initiative and show your authenticity. And when you become a leader, it's not about only progressing yourself and your own interests. It's about how does your leadership style influence others to rise up to the rank, rise up to the challenge, and become their own advocate as well as an advocate for others that are working in their circles.
That's actually
All
very
right.
interesting, Hisham. Thank you for that. I would like to open the time for other people to make comments about this quote or to raise other questions because, as I said, we decided to launch this with Hisham, and it's important to give chance to you
Ale-
for
A-
asking questions.
Alejandro, I've got a question here coming in through the email. So the question that says pretty much, so I've been promoted from one division where I'm performing among a team that are very much in very similar seniority level to me, to one where I'm actually more senior and I have to win clients and work for the company. I'm trying to incentivize people within that team to actually become more leaders and more initiative followers so that they can rise up to their ranks. How do I influence them without having to sound too bossy or too judgmental?
Okay, good. The way I do respond to this question is that every time there's fear, is because there's something within us that needs to be changed. So, for example, um, maybe I'm just fearing competition. Maybe I'm just fearing not being good enough comparing to other people. Maybe I'm fearing that my opinions, my knowledge, my expertise is not good enough to be able to fulfill the requirements of the role, right? So every time there's fear, it's something to modify or to change within the person that is actually feeling that fear, right? So when this fear is overcome, my recommendation is always put a step forward, which means effectively just making the change. So, for example, if the person really wants to motivate other people, they want to incentivize people, right? You need to be an example first. So, when the person faces the fear, now the employees are really happy or confident that the leader is not fearful, which is great. So, the employees can even copy the leadership and they can, of course, face other potential challenges without any sort of fear. So the best way to incentivize people is being an example, so leading by example. So every time there's a circumstance that is not appropriate, that is not good for the company or for the department, the leader needs to be able to overcome that challenge without fear, right? And once the employees see that their leader is being able to do that, they feel incentivized, they feel motivated to follow their leader. So it's all about leading by example, my recommendation in this question.
Good, good. If I need to add anything to this, which is a brilliant answer by Alejandro, by the way, kudos on it. It's obviously when you actually then thrust into a leadership position among a network or a team, you actually have to try and bring the best out of them, whether it's in town hall meetings where you actually present them a certain challenge without having to direct it at a certain someone. And whoever takes on the challenge, make sure that they're supported by their team rather than taking it solo. In the end, you're trying to foster those collaborative teamwork that actually brings up multiple leaders within the team overall, rather than the one point hero, where they might actually excel in a certain area. Good on them for doing that. But you're trying to get well-rounded people who take the initiative and prioritize the team over themselves. So in doing that, you're actually then fostering that collaboration culture with them. Obviously, in winning clients, they want to see people working well together. And in winning work, you actually have to have people working together, obviously sometimes pushing the boundaries together in order to present a product that is outstanding and it shows its own merit through the creative process and the collaboration of people and ideas that has gone through it. So it's a very good question. And I really thank you very much for posting it on. Any other questions?
Okay, I was looking at the chat box and I think there's no more questions, Hisham. I think we can move to the next slide.
All right. So we will move to the next slide. So this is pretty much the Q&A. So we've got questions if you need to actually post in. We do encourage you to use the time and available to you now while Alejandro and I are around. And these are the resources just to actually get you, if you want to read more about it. So R.B. Kaiser is pretty much an authority on it, and this is his book, Filling the Leadership Pipeline. And he talks about the background context, the market context, and the organization context, where people, individuals, and organizations have to be able to work together to obviously increase the depth of learning, but also make sure that the leaders in different multidimensional aspects of leadership, whether it's technical communication, can be fostered in their own unique way to present their voice authentically, but also contribute to the overall success of the team and the organization. The next one is the Competing Today While Preparing for Tomorrow. There's an article piece in 1999 by D.F. Abel in MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Sloan Management Review. So I do encourage you to read through those to have a bit of an idea of how they tackle preparing future leaders in the firms. All right. We do have one question, Alejandro. We'll just probably put it in.
Good.
Has popped in. So, what qualities or traits do you believe in essential as identifying future leaders within the firm? We just mentioned those, which are pretty much be able to stretch yourself in the roles and responsibilities from the research, be able to show communication and decisiveness when you're actually taking action along a challenge, and understand the roles that you have to communicate and inspire others to do the same, to get the best version of themselves and bring their authentic self, their actual flowing, performing self out onto the work culture. And the second one I actually have, it's the second question here is, so how do you, let me read this because it's bit of a mouthful. How can we as employees influence our leaders to invest more in our leadership development? So this is probably from staff looking to actually increase the current leaders' awareness of their initiatives.
Yes, that's a good point, and I'm actually very glad that these two questions came up because it's actually very interesting to know that people are engaged in this session today. So I would like to add something to the first question, Hisham, that you said
Sure.
about the traits and beliefs that are essential for identifying future leaders. I would like to add that even though we are trained in certain hard skills, soft skills are actually very important when it comes to selecting those leaders. So being able to influence others, being able to motivate others, being able to be trustworthy, being able to encourage other people to be the best version of themselves is actually very important for leaders, because we need to remember that to be a leader and to make decisions and to make a company grow in the future, we cannot do it only by ourselves. We need people around us. And when we do have those abilities to influence, to encourage other people to do their best, we of course win as a team together. So I wanted to add that to the answer question, and I'm glad that the question was raised by somebody in the audience.
Good. Yeah, I think with this, pretty much we have to wrap up. So coming to 1 o'clock, I'll put in our details. So thank you very much for attending this, and this will be recorded and casted or posted on LinkedIn and YouTube for your benefit. If you need to reach out to us, and we do encourage you to reach out, then please take your phones and scan the respective QR code for myself or for Alejandro to get to visit us, communicate, and touch base with us. You also have our emails also on the screen. So mine is Hisham at ibera.com.au. Alejandro's is ao@alejandroconsulting.com. We had the pleasure today of presenting you our research and opinions in a discussion format of how to prepare your firm's future leaders. And also, if you're part of the staff, how do you actually stand out and show your initiative in leading up for a potential future leadership role within your firm? We do believe in investment and continual development in those firms, understanding and developing and identifying those leaders in a position that will actually benefit the company as it navigates diversity and also as it navigates this potential market competitive positioning and landscape moving forward. So to this, we bring us to the end of our presentation. Thank you very much for staying with us, and we hope you've actually found this very useful. Hopefully see you in the next one.
And thank you very much, Hisham, for having agreed to this collaboration, which was actually very nice. I really believe that the audience was finding insightful content in this presentation. And as Hisham mentioned, it's going to be posted on YouTube for that, so that you can, of course, look at it later with more time. And even also on LinkedIn will be posted so that you guys can, of course, look at the content, look at maybe part of the chapters that were covered throughout the presentation to emphasize in maybe more details later with more time. So thank you very much. And Hisham, I look forward for a future collaboration with you.
Absolutely. I'm very honored, as I said, to work with you, Alejandro. You're very good working presentation skill and research opinion. So guys, if this is your opportunity to get hold of us, and we're happy to help in your any development, career change, journey, or transformation, or even finding a clear direction to the way you're actually finding your career path in life. So let us know in the comments, and also thank you very much for joining us. Have a great day. Thanks, Alejandro.
Thank you very much. And for the audience, thank you very much as well, and have a lovely day.
All right. See you.